I love that phrase, civic muscle. It's certainly going to be needed, especially in the redistricting world now that the parties have gotten into the fray. I just wonder what each of you, what your reactions were when you heard, I guess, first about was going on in Texas and then sort of California's rebuttal to that.
It's kind of heartbreaking, to be honest. It's very sad, and I'm an unaffiliated voter, and I fear that, it's kind of like the parties have forgotten that voters matter, and they've decided that the parties matter, and, the party leaders are the ones who decide what's going to happen, and voters are really very much pawns in that game, and I think the sad thing is when voters feel like they're pawns in the game, they just step out, and I think that civic muscle that Emma was talking about, that's so important. You can make voters feel like they just don't matter, and they just stop voting. So when I looked at Texas, I was really intrigued because, it looks like there's possibly more Democrats than Republicans in Texas, and yet the turnout for Democrats is very, very low, and the turnout for Republicans in 2024 was very, very high. And my thought as I've watched what California is doing is, wow, if I had millions of dollars, which they're gonna spend millions of dollars in California overturning the independent redistricting map. If I had millions of dollars, I would be hiring young organizers in Texas to go door to door to show people the maps, to talk to them about, hey, your voice is being taken away. You need to register. You need to vote. You need to come out. I mean, you need to engage. And so, to me, the answer of harm to democracy is not to step back from democracy, but it's to re-engage democracy, to promote democracy, to strengthen democracy. And if you're going to invest, why invest in overturning a citizen-drawn map, and drawing a new one? Rather invest in helping people understand what's at stake, that they have a role to play, and that if they play that role, they could create a dummy mander, which is, a gerrymander that stretches too far and gets overturned. And so I find the whole thing very disheartening, and the challenge for voters is to say, we refuse to be treated as pawns, and we're going to still lean in, and we're still going to take agency ourselves, and we're still going to insist on being heard. It's disheartening to watch what's taking place.
Yeah, I think with it's either bad luck or good luck that the Utah win came in the middle of the battles elsewhere, because it's a different situation at a time when Texas and California are rushing to gerrymander, and Utah we're saying no to gerrymandering. And frankly, it is frustrating to watch that narrative get lost or spun more in the national press than the local. The local Utah press has been extraordinary. There's been multiple reporters who have followed this, have done a really good job showing the nuance. And then I open up a news article with the national press, and who do they ask to? They asked us to give a quote, a Democrat and a Republican from the party, and they give a partisan spin of what's happening in Utah. Do they claim victory, or they claim, defeat and judicial tampering? And so that is unfortunate. So I think maybe it's a loss overall that it happened in the middle of this, which is why I really appreciate opportunities like this to come on platforms and say, no, what we're saying in Utah is no gerrymandering. It's very, very different. It just is getting kind of swept up in the time, and it took a long time for us to get a judgment in Utah. But when you read that, you know why, because it's very thorough. The judge, I think, my guess is she felt the weight of what she was having to rule on, and really took the time to write something that was quite thought out.
Mm.
So we'll take what we got, and we'll move on to the next thing. I'm glad that it's getting the attention nationally, what's happening in Utah. I wish it wasn't getting a partisan spin,
Mhm.
because that's just not reflective of what's happening.
I think that some of the reason maybe people feel drawn to parties right now is because they feel like there is a threat. Whether you are a Democrat or a Republican, you feel like the other party is an existential threat to the country, to your particular way of life, to the things that you stand for. And that one, I think, leads to the desire for a short-term fix, short-term solution. We just have to win, right? And that makes it, much more difficult to advocate for long-term, slower process changes like we've been talking about here today. So I wonder what you would say, or what you have said to that argument about, well, we're in a crisis right now, and politics is the only way to get out of it.
I refuse to be ruled by fear. And when someone is trying to use fear to, I have like I would say to everyone, develop your antenna for when someone is trying to utilize fear to persuade you that someone is the enemy who is not, and that the urgency level is so high that you must turn against others. Like, to me, that's just fundamental human decency that has been, abused in this fractured media environment in which, which those who understand psychology and understand marketing and understand how to get people to do stuff, would utilize fear as their number one tactic. And it's hard not to feel that way sometimes. It's I'm not saying that you should. I'm not being a Pollyanna. I'm not saying everything's fine. I'm very, very deeply aware of the threats that are plaguing us at this moment. We may disagree about all the different threats, but they're there. Um, but I think it's very American and patriotic to refuse to succumb to that fear, to look that fear straight in the eye, and to choose and to be very to understand and know that there are real problems, but then to choose to find the people to work alongside who are going to be courageous alongside us, who are going to decide that I'm not going to be ruled by that, and I'm going to look for solutions that aren't dependent upon rallying that part of my brain, that reptilian part of my brain that wants me to turn against each other, turn against my own family and friends. And I'm going to choose to find those people. And if you have that mentality and you start looking around, you will find an abundant number of Americans who care, who want to do things to break kind of partisan power, um, and and who will frankly nourish and enrich you in the process. I always say I am not interested in being involved with anything that doesn't make people doesn't make people better in the process. So if it's turning you into something that makes you feel hardened and everyone is a threat, and it closes your heart off to relationships, then that to me is like a warning sign that I need to shift my focus, shift my the group that I associate with, and open myself up to some new experiences with different people.
The challenge is that we need more leaders like you, Emma. We need people who are able to say it's not us versus them. I think there's so much effort to divide us, to say us versus them, rural versus urban, um, you know, lifelong Americans against immigrants, Republican against Democrat, and to say we're all Americans and we all thrive when we all thrive. I've been watching our budget impasse here in Pennsylvania, and if our cities are strangled, our entire economy is strangled. We all are harmed by that. So how do we remind each other that what's best for you is also what's best for me, and what's best for one community is going to help all of our communities. And so how do we move in that direction? I think it's really important that we remember that the loudest voice is not always the most accurate voice. And so in this partisan escalating fight, you hear people saying, well, you can't show up, with a knife to a gunfight. And I think, number one, can we not discuss our political engagement in terms of knives and guns? I mean, I think that's just so horrifyingly toxic. But then also to say there are many people who are not, who do not want to be in a fight at all. What they really want is political leaders who talk to everybody, who meet with everybody, who look for solutions that work for everybody. I had a recent interaction with a legislator who's very different from me, different part of the state, probably different background, different age, probably different part. I'm unaffiliated. I know what affiliation he was, but I'm unaffiliated. We had a really good conversation about the fact that issues are divided as, this thing is Republican and this thing is Democratic. And what communities actually need is nuanced solutions that have a little bit of all things, that you can't, that those conversations are currently not possible, that they're not allowed, they're not enabled, and that legislators themselves are struggling with, we can't solve real problems if we can't, if the solutions that we want to talk about are suddenly labeled as, we can't talk about that because you're this party. And so we've got to find a way past that. I think the truth is most Americans are really tired of the divisiveness, really tired of the conversation about knife fights and gunfights, really saddened by the political violence that we see escalating, and that we have to find an off ramp. And I do think the off ramp is some real important structural changes. Less partisan. Get rid of partisan redistricting and move towards people based redistricting. Lower the money in politics, open the primaries, but also change the way that we talk about each other and change the way that we talk to each other. I think that's really important.